All right, we're coking and joking, or at least joking. Maybe we're coking. Um, so housekeeping items. Every video that I record that's net new, probably expect some sort of minor, maybe an overhaul, change to the format. Because obviously, I'm very early on in this sort of thing, and I'm still trying to find out what style works for me, what sort of editing tools, assets, approach for all of this that I'm interested in doing, man. Look at how gnarly that brain shut looks, man. The thing is, it's there. It's a thing. We'll do a video on how all that worked out for me. Because I have a lot of really interesting insight about medical processes and how to survive something that honestly should have killed me many times over. Um, and how a lot of the fact that I'm still sucking air comes down to just the simple fact that I was able to make decisions and advocate for myself in ways that are not painfully obvious. And, there's a time where you really have to kind of lock on. It's, when your life is on the line, right? Not to say that I'm always going to make the right choices when it comes to my health, and that there are many, many more challenges and choices I have to make before this show hits its final act. But regardless, I think that, if I can impart some of those experiences, some of that wisdom with everyone else, so they kind of know how to approach things to avoid, dying. That doesn't sound like fun at all. So today's episode. So one thing I want to do is obviously make sure that the text on my notes are a little bit more clear. I did add a background too to kind of avoid distraction of cats showing up. Obviously everything is brain themed. I kind of like this marriage of blue and violet, reddish magic, reality, as I say, reality tearing magic, and sort of an electrical format. Combined with technology and neurostimulation. I don't know. I think marriage of the two is very fascinating. I've always gotten down with the illithids in D&D. What do they call mind flayers, right? Whichever one, some people have heard of it for the first time through something like Stranger Things, but lithids are kind of a brain obsessed species of brain eaters, right? They eat brains, but they're incredibly intelligent, obviously, and their main magic type is psionic. Probably more along psychic than psionic. I mean, they're the same sort of bubble, if you will. Psychic just simply means that, for the most part, the magic of the power is being sourced from the mind and you're using it to attack the mind, which, oftentimes is one of the more powerful forms of magic. Maybe you think about it from like an X-Men standpoint, right? Fact that Professor X, either with the aid of cerebral, I don't know his machine, his magic thinking cap machine, he could kill everyone on the planet, right? With a thought. But obviously in proximity, he could do that to anyone that stands before him. If not obviously outright control them, do typical mind control, which illithids are very adept at that as well. But they can emit psionic and psychic mind blasts on people to damage their brains, right? And, brains, as I can attest, are not exactly unfragile. It don't take much to go into a seizure and to create permanent damage on a brain. I have those things. It always sounds awful when you say, yeah, I have brain damage. Wow, what? Thank you, CC Cleaner. Go away. What the hell? I don't want you. You're uninstalled. But anyways, yeah. So that's that. Those two are the sort of recent ads. Obviously, I have my my Scatterbrain podcast logo up the top there is Clue, as well as the Brainstem Studios logo, which if you are just now learning this, this is actually one piece of a portfolio of things that I'm working on under the sort of Brainstem Studio. Brainstem being because that is where you die with the type of brain tumor that I have. It pushes on the brainstem, displaces it, and interferes with communication between the brain and the heart and the brain and the lungs. And your cardiovascular system no longer receives central nervous system and impulses and signals to operate. You do it, and probably when you're sleeping. So, the fact that I have sleep apnea on both forms, obstructed as well as central meaning signals, right? Signals aren't exactly doing our thing. Isn't really a shock, all things considered. It wasn't even for the fact that I have a fairly small face relative to what you should have. Like, you should have a lot more room around here. Weight isn't even necessarily the biggest contributing factor, but yes, having heavy jaw lines will play a role, and how your face sort of slumps back when you're sleeping. I'm not a back sleeper, so that helps. But if I do end up on my back, obviously my apnea is much, much worse. But with the whole tumor thing, obviously everything has gotten significantly worse. My sleep apnea was mild before all my surgeries, even while the tumor was in the process of killing me. I didn't know it was there. After all the surgeries, no, everything got a lot worse. Well, a lot worse. Yeah, sometimes it'd be that way, right? So, you got to make some different changes, some different accommodations. Been on a CPAP for 5 years, but yeah, things have really gone downhill since about 2 years plus ago when I had all my surgeries. Anyhow, so that's that. Today, I definitely wanted to get away from the politics. One, because YouTube has some very unusual policies around politics. They're just doing programmatic scanning for various moderation and even potential shadow banning. As they just hear certain words be spoken, it's interesting how quick they collapse down your your reach and conversion and click through opportunities for people to discover you. So I feel like maybe those topics need to be held till later down the road, at least the controversial ones, until a little bit of a community is built, and then from there, that stuff's very cyclic, right? Once you establish an audience, you establish people that are watching your stuff. Then the topics, as long as you're not violating, community guidelines, you have a lot more flexibility there, because then people are ending up on your channel driven through just simple popularity or subscriptions, which that alone will then get you back into an exposure area where, and you see, like, I watch a lot of Asmongold, and he talks about a lot of insane shit, and he says a lot of really fucked shit sometimes. I don't know if he really feels that way or what, but he does, and it doesn't stop him from getting views, and that's because he's already established by the time he's done all that, right? He started off as a WoW guy, making content based upon, playing that, or tricks, tips, thoughts, opinions, whatever. Within that realm, that's how he established an initial audience, and now he's moved into the reacts, and especially he spends copious amounts of time now talking about politics. And obviously they're not shadow banning him in any way, shape, or form. I just don't think you can be a new player on the platform without an audience and expect to get a reach if you're talking about those things. So, which isn't a problem with me, because, some of this stuff is much more interesting to me. Politics is such a frustrating thing to talk about. I don't like talking about it. I'd rather talk about cool stuff like this. And what is this? So this is just this particular thing I posted on my Facebook some weeks back, but it's sort of pulling together various different observations I've had over my lifetime. whether it be things that were sourced from TV shows like The Outer Limits, which I may mention that somewhere in this post, um, to thought experiments such as the Ship of Theseus, recent shows like Pantheon and other things, and where we're kind of heading as a species towards either the notion of uploading our consciousness, the ability to either create pre-maturated clones. That means a clone that's already at your age, right? So boom, boom, there I am. So if you think something like altered carbon, right, where you could clone your sleeve, as they would call it, and then even go as far as duplicate the stack, which is where they themselves are housed, and create a true clone, which apparently is extraordinarily illegal there. But all those sort of concepts in science fiction play into where I'm going with this, and what I think is the reality of these things. And I think it's something that a lot of people don't particularly absorb, understand, and if they did, if they understood the sort of barrier that I think exists around this, we would probably stop. Not necessarily just glamorizing it, but chasing after this as if this is good for people, because I don't think it is. I think there is a very core reason why this technology is dangerous. This idea is dangerous. So the first thing starts off, what we got to talk about is the Ship of Theseus, right? So this is an old sort of thought experiment that basically looks at identity and says, okay, you have a boat, right? The boat is the Ship of Theseus, right? That boat's obviously comprised of parts, right? We'll just say like it's an old school Greek, I don't know, galleon, whatever. It has it's mostly wood. The parts are fairly large. There's not a lot of small pieces, aside from maybe like whatever binding material, nails or whatever they're using. But the bottom line is, for the most part, it's a fairly large ship comprised of large components, large planks, etc. So the idea is that as that ship is being used for whatever exploration, warfare, it doesn't really matter, and whether it sustains battle damage or just wear and tear, and pieces need to be replaced. The idea is, okay, so as you're replacing the parts, at what point does the ship cease to be the original Ship of Theseus, because so many of the parts have been replaced either at one time, over a period of time, if that even occurs? And if so, when does that occur, right? Is it when you hit 50% plus, or is it 100%? And to some people say, well, it really doesn't matter, right? 100%. Yeah, no, that doesn't really matter, because when you sit back and you think about it, our bodies, right? Our bodies are actually replacing things all the time. All right. I would say, I remember hearing 10 years, every 10 years, by every decade or so, our body has essentially replaced every cell in our body at one point or another. So every 10 years, you're theoretically in a new body, right? It doesn't happen all at once, obviously. It's a fairly slow process, but it's occurring. And we are still who we are, right? At least relatively speaking, right? Now that's where things get kind of weird and interesting. So when you say I'm still who I am, well, what is that based off of, right? Well, number one, it's based off of subjective experience of the present. As I'm talking to you now, I am me, right? Or at least I'm convinced of me, right? I'm under the firm belief that I am the same person I have always been, right? And I established that basis, right, of being alive and being me based upon lived experiences, which take on the form of memory. And the fact that I'm still, as the present is unfolding, I'm still here speaking, talking, doing things. HBC. Now, that gets so interesting, because it's like, memories to me is where I think is the pivot point of life. I think if you erase even a minute of someone's memories, you've effectively killed an instance of them. You killed the real instance of them, so to speak. So if you were to damage my brain in a very controlled way, or, use some serum that makes me forget something. That was a fully subjective, immersed experience, right? So this isn't like a situation like anesthesia, right? Obviously, I've had a lot of anesthesia, but so with anesthesia, you really don't have memory of a lot of things, right? So if you're given propofol, which is sort of known as the milk of amnesia, because essentially the idea there is you'll remember things. Versed sort of plays on the same concept. Versed doesn't really put you to sleep. It just makes you not give a damn about anything. You still feel pain and everything, but you just don't care and you won't remember it, or at least that's the claim. And so the idea is if if you don't remember pain, were you ever in pain, right? And that's a very, very crazy concept because, yes, you were in pain because the body has stressors that are going to be released and things that are going to happen that ensures that something traumatic happened to the body. So, for instance, when I was in the ICU, I went into what's known as junction rhythm. So junction rhythm is a secondary sort of backup pacemaking rhythm that your heart will do when normal sinus rhythm, which is your normal primary pacemaking rhythm, can't function for some reason. A lot of different reasons that could happen. Could be, structural, chemical blocks, due to, either a structural issue or maybe your electrolytes are out of whack, things like that. But obviously the sinus node is what controls the heart most of the time. Under junction rhythm, your secondary pacemaker sort of keeps your heart beating. Now, I don't know what node that is, and I don't know all the technicals about it, but the bottom line is, I was in it for about a week. Now, it's most likely due to stress, right? My body was extremely stressed, and my heart essentially was so traumatized, so inundated by dealing with whatever I was going through at the time that it switched over to a secondary pacemaker. Now that's sort of scary, right? Because now, that's one more step towards death, right? That's one more step towards some sort of potentially fatal arrhythmia like VFib or ventricular fibrillation, where the bottom chambers of your heart begin to quiver. AFib is still a problem, but AFib doesn't necessarily just kill you, right? Because your ventricles are what moves the blood throughout the entire body, right? So they need to be able to function as close to correctly as possible. Once they start having problems, you got about 20 seconds till you lose consciousness, and anywhere from 6 to 10 minutes before you're dead. Now, you're clinically dead probably as soon as it happens, right? So within a second or two, you're in theory clinically dead. If we're assuming clinical death is you will not be alive anymore if not for the intervention of medical staff or procedures or something, right? Modern medicine needs to get involved and save your life. That could be, established as CPR, an AED, automated external defibrillator. Now, obviously, it's external because we're not going in, but they do actually have paddles or like little probes that they can actually crack your chest open and put it right on the heart so that they are shocking your heart directly rather than going through, the chest and trying to cross the heart with the arc where it may or may not actually work correctly. Obviously, they work pretty well because lives are saved with it. Usually, if you're in VFib, an AED is about the only thing that's going to keep someone alive. Obviously, ASTOL is probably the worst of them because that is your actual flatline. That's one thing that TV tends to get wrong. Is they show people flatlining and they make it seem like that person is, in cardiac arrest. Yes, that's a form of cardiac arrest, but that's ASTOL. That means there's absolutely no electricals happening to the heart. Survival on that is extraordinarily low. That's why you see so many times that they'll do, all right, you get the flat line and, they do their magic and they bring the person back. That's actually not common. You actually flatline, the likelihood they can restart your electricals is not super high. That is about as bad as it gets. VFib's a different story because with VFib, they're sort of kind of causing a stall, right? Like, so AFib, your heart's going nuts, electricals are out of whack, they're not going in the right sequence, everything's going haywire. So, an AED will stop the heart and then restart the heart, hopefully under a normal rhythm, sort of correct that electricals. It's quite literally just turning your heart off and on again. um, but that's how you survive. And in the meantime, if you don't want to have complete and utter brain death or severe brain damage, you need to have CPR or some sort of way to circulate oxygenated blood. So, anyways, not to get too far off on topic on that, but somehow my heart ended up in junction rhythm, most likely as a result of pain and stress, or potentially under some of my Versed-based procedures. I had one where, in the ICU, not even in the operating room, but they can do some procedures in an ICU room. They came in and they did what is known as an external ventricular drain, EVD. I had them on both sides ultimately, but my first one was put on this side. One of these scars up here is where they need it. And I can kind of feel, right there, like that's, so right in that spot, they drilled a hole with a crank drill while I was awake, and they had somebody just holding my head like this, and I had like something over my eyes, and I was just didn't care about anything. That drug for said is such a wild thing. Like, they literally can say they're gonna chop your head off. You're like, all right, that's cool, bro. Whatever. It is one of the chillest, make you not give a damn about a fucking thing medication out there. But it's also supposed to make you so you don't remember things. Now, in my case, I do remember things. I may not remember it all very clearly, but I do remember enough to know it happened. But I remember it through the lens of not caring, right? Because most people, you tell them, you had your head held and they used a crank drill because they can't use a burr drill because obviously there's not a lot of material there. They could hit gray matter very quickly. So, they use a crank drill to be much slower and more methodical about it. And the idea that you just have someone just sitting there slowly, I'm assuming this is what it looked like. a little crank, just sitting there, slowly drilling a hole into your skull to get to your brain. I'm sure for a lot of people that would fucking not be something they'd want to sign up for. And I kind of didn't care already because, I'd already been through so many surgeries and I was having so many issues and things weren't that great as it was. It's like, whatever, you got to do what you got to do. So, I was never pushing back against this stuff. But anyways, the whole point is memories, right? So I'm not supposed to have memory of it. I do. So that, and then obviously general anesthesia, the more aggressive version of anesthesia, which just basically makes it so that you like, my first ever surgery was my first 12-hour surgery for the original brain resection, or no, resection of the brain, gosh, that'd be awful, of the tumor. That was about a 12-hour surgery. I've had two 12-hour surgeries. The first one was the first surgery. And I remember them wheeling me in. That was at UC San Diego, and they have a very small purpose-built operating room, right? So it's not like, so where I had all my follow-up surgeries for my complications was at Tampa General Hospital, and that hospital, massive operating rooms, but those operating rooms are meant to cover, a very large portfolio of surgeries, where this one wasn't. This one was purpose-built for dealing with the tumor. So I remember being wheeled in, looking around like, man, this is wild looking. Just never seen anything like it before. Everything in there is just so alien looking, right? I was trying to keep my cool and keep a good attitude about it. So they wheeled me in. And I'm like, oh, this is where the party is happening. I guess it's good I got invited, right? They looked up from scrubbing in, and I think they chuckled or something. And I remember whoever wheeled me in, I think it was a surgical tech. He uh, he put a mask on my face, and he said something to the tune of, "Wow, wow, look at that! You got some lung capacity." And I looked at where he was looking, which is one of these accordion style things, just pumping up and down. And I guess that's how they could tell, based upon how far the accordion was moving, what your current breath capacity was. And up to that point, I remember that I had spent some time working on my lungs at one point, to the point where I knew I had a pretty extraordinary lung capacity, just because I had pneumonia a couple of years prior, and they were sort of shocked that with pneumonia I still had the lung capacity that I had. Um, so I was just thinking to myself, "Watch this, right?" And I took a long, deep breath and thinking to impress the guy. And I never heard if he was impressed or not, because I did that. And the next thing you know, I'm waking up in uh, recovery, right? In the ICU in recovery. Um, and so, first thing that I remember them asking me is, what day is it? And, I had no idea it was a day and a half later, right? That not only, not only was I obviously out for 12 to 14 hours on general, but then also that recovery process where you start to wake up, you generally don't have much memory of that at all. So from my perspective, almost 36 hours had skipped, right? And the fact that I remember from that point moving forward, it's like I didn't exist prior to that, right? And I might as well not have, because my subjective experience, the feedback loop that is life to me, was paused, and it was paused for about 36 hours and then resumed at some point. And that was a very unusual thing, right? Because there was pictures that my fiance took of me reacting to the doctors and the staff trying to wake me up, and and it's funny because one of them, my eyes look like it's about to pop out. I may be able to throw a picture up because it is kind of funny. And I don't have any recollection of any of this. Obviously, I'm awake. Obviously, I'm conscious to some point, but my ability to retain this experience isn't there. So, for all intensive purposes, um, who I normally would be wasn't there anymore, right? That person is dead, right? The person that is going to retain these experiences and be able to recollect them as if they were lived experiences, that person's not there, right? Because that person is me as we talk now, and I have no recollection of that. It doesn't matter if my body was there. It doesn't matter if there was some level of consciousness that's an approximation of me. I'm so sick of this thing just making noise. Um, I tried so hard, but in the end, it didn't matter to actually not put this on silence. But I can't do it. I don't know how people deal with volume on their phone. So, anyways, the point that I'm making there is that when you sit back and you really think about lived experiences and subjectivity, you're really talking about the present, right? Because anything that we remember in theory could not be correct, could not be the actual experience of what it was, and you're recalling that through the focal lens that is a memory, right? So like you think even back to when you were 5 years old, like my earliest memories are like there's so little of that remains. I can't, there's certain things that like even the ICU, which was 2 years ago, I can't remember a lot of those things. I can't remember the way it smelled. I can make some guesses, some educated guesses. I can't remember if I was cold or not. I know I was in pain because I remember saying things about pain, but I don't remember what that pain feels like. Right. So there's these sort of um, losses that happen. Right. It's not a lossless callback to that data. Um, And there's a lot that happens, right? Like as I'm living here now and in the present, and I especially when I'm paying attention to it, there is tons of that. And there's all the visuals and all the things that come with the visuals, which I got some light over there, some orangish light coming through the window there. There's all these things that you piece together. I can hear myself, even though I only have one working ear, I can still hear myself. I can hear, the movement in this chair create a little clicking. I can see that I'm holding something and I forgot what I was doing with it. I'm turning off the damn volume. So there are these aspects to being in the present lived experience that has so much fidelity in it that memory simply cannot ever be a substitution. Never. It just never happened. It doesn't matter if we ever come up with like the full experience, deep dive, 360, stereotropic, whatever recording. And we replicate as much of that as possible to create like a true full dive virtual reality experience. Or I've always theorized, and it'll be a great conversation one day, that we'll never discover true time travel. Time travel will really be more of a capturing of data, and we're even play that data back at a different period. So if I was to sit here and have this amazing device that could record what it's like to subjectively experience the present, and I was to record an hour of that yesterday, and then today I was to turn it on and essentially relive that hour from yesterday, I effectively time traveled, right? I went back 24 hours. But it has to be captured to near indistinguishable fidelity as living it, which I just don't know. To the human mind, I think we could get there because, we already can do things with VR to sort of trick the human mind and the subjective experience into forgetting it's in a virtual reality to some degree. But obviously the truest sense, like, not having any sort of degradation or attenuation of the data stream, that I don't think we're ever going to get to. And that then leads to the next problem, right? So, oftentimes this concept, right, of kind of where I'm going with this, right, goes into teleportation. So here I mentioned the Outer Limits episode, Think Like a Dinosaur. I don't always remember this, but this was, this is probably for the old crowd. I watched this. I'm barely starting as a kid. This was in the early 2000s. I think it was a reboot of the Outer Limits. And in this, what they do is they sort of introduce a version of teleportation that isn't too far off of how Star Trek does it, right? The idea in this particular series is that you are a maturated clone, so clone of your current age. Everything about you is generally the same. Now, again, it cannot be exactly the same because the process of creating that takes time. And then the second part, which is the movement, well, there isn't even a movement, right? You're just cloned with the same everything. Like everything is captured in a frozen state. And in technology, we call this a snapshot, right? So they take a snapshot of as you are, they clone that at a different location, right? So they send the data over because the data can be transferred, obviously, at incredible speeds across incredible distances. We already can do that, right? They've already done that with fucking lasers, right? Like they've transferred insane data just with optical data relays. So the idea is obviously we can transmit a data signal insanely quicker with less concern all the way to a different area in a galaxy. And then once the sort of, again, in IT, we would call it a checksum or file integrity is passed. That's where you say, okay, here's my original, here's my copy. Compare these at a machine level, at the binary level, or some close approximation to that. There's other layers like JIT, but there's essentially, this is a non-human level, right? This is either a hex or a binary, something that the machine understands, but humans generally won't unless you're a fucking freak of nature, which I'm sure they exist. And by doing so, you can say, okay, yeah, that's That's an exact copy, right? Okay. And so in this particular show, what they then do is they then destroy the original, right? They quickly atomize it. But in Star Trek, that part's a little bit more amalgamated. The actual atomization happens at the source before the destination is confirmed. So in that case, they atomize the person, and then those atoms become the data stream, and then they get sent to wherever you're going, where they're recompiled into what's supposed to be an exact reassembly of you, right? There's a lot of problems with both of these, right? So obviously, the first one I think does a better job of sort of pointing out, because that's the whole plot line. In this particular episode, this woman who is going, who's traveling, she's like a researcher or something. She's traveling to an alien world. She gets transmitted through their teleportation, but the final process, which is destruction of the source, can't proceed because they don't get confirmation that the original that the that they have their true to form copy. So once they finally do get confirmation, they realize, fuck, now we have two of them, right? And the problem is the woman that was laying there on the table being teleported, she's still her, right? Like nothing's changed. The fact they made an exact copy of her on the other side of the world didn't change anything. And so what that should do is that should, one, automatically be a red flag. Obviously in the show, they have to balance the equation, right? They have to remove the original. And so it's all about really them just trying to murder this chick, right? And her supposed to be okay with it. But now it's different, right? When you're going through the teleportation process, maybe they're knocking you out, you're unconscious, whatever it is. You're in a state where you can't resist or even be aware that, this process is occurring. Whereas now she's awake and she's wandering around, and she's who she's always been from her perspective. From her perspective, she got naked, laid on a table, and, moments later, she can't breathe, and they're waking her up, telling her there's a problem. Now, turns out there wasn't a problem, right? She should have just never been woken up. She should have just been atomized while she was asleep. But I then assert, well, if things played out the way that they played, where now there's essentially a copy at the destination, and the original is completely oblivious of that, right? She only has the memories and the experiences leading up to that moment where everything had occurred for the teleportation. So to her, she is her, right? She is the person. So that's a real big problem, right? That's a real big problem, because to me, that states that these teleportations devices are just elaborate cloning machines, and they're killing the person, right? And how would you know, right? You would never know, because so it's like the body snatcher kind of thing. So if you took me, right, and you wanted somebody to say, is that the real, or is that an imposter, right? Sorry, just kind of fucking knocks myself, so I'll have to block that out. Anyways, so they'll say, is that the real Maz? And they'll just be like, yeah. I mean, everything, he has the right memory. Like, they'll quiz me. They do like a tempo check, right? To see if I'm the real person that I claim to be. And I'll pass it all, right? Whatever the criteria is, which isn't going to be high, we'll be honest with you, right? Like, you see it in TV shows and movies where they're like, prove you're so-and-so. And I'm like, you remember that time we were kids, we didn't think, right? And so the idea is that they have information that only that person had, therefore they must be real. Obviously, that's a very low bar for an authenticity test. But the biggest problem there is you're essentially stating the source of truth is not from the person themselves, but it's from an observer, right? Somebody else has to attest that, hey, yeah, that's the real person, and whatever that may mean from there. But the thing is, like I said, low bar. Number one, the observer is not you, right? They don't know what your experience is, who you are. Um, and therefore, if I put in front of them a clone, a near perfect clone for all intents and purposes, it looks perfect. It has all the exact memories that I have up to a certain point. And you put that in front of people who know me as intimately as anyone can. And you say, well, is that, yeah, that's okay. Damn, did it again. I gotta really stop using my damn name like that. I don't even really matter. It's like, who gives a fuck? Okay, so my name's coming up good shit. I know just people get weird about, yeah, you shouldn't use your real name. But anyways, it's hard to pop off and remember to use a fucking screen name. Anyways, so we sit there. And it's also not like somebody couldn't just fucking screenshot this and do a reverse image check anyways. It's whatever. Today I'm not gonna edit it out. Who gives a fuck? Nazarim lines in real life. Who gives a fuck? I'm not exactly hiding. Anyways, so from their perspective, they passed the test. They are you. They're the authentic you as best as they can tell, right? Well, what about to you? Well, they asked that person, and that person has all the subjective experiences up to moments before, right? They're only missing a few minutes worth of experiences, memory, but they didn't live it, right? This is all a copy. Now they're convinced they're you, right? They're convinced they're the real deal, right? And you see that. I mean, you see that in the recent show Invincible, where the cloning villain, where they can never figure out who is the original because the clones are so absolutely convinced they're the original, right? And again, if everything is the same except for a version number that you can't see, how would you know, right? How would you know the person you're talking to is not really them, right? And so again, let's play that out. Let's say Star Trek, Picard wants to get teleported up to a ship, and he gets teleported. And what they don't realize is the moment they initiate the teleporter, they're killing Picard. The only person that knows they did that is Picard. He's dead though. And the person that they're reassembling on the teleportation deck is just somebody that very closely matches Picard, who believes they're Picard, who in any way that we measure identity, all those processes are passed. So to us, we're like, check. This meets the criteria to be Picard. But no, I don't think that's true at all. I think the real Picard's dead. I think they've killed Picard many, many times and basically just replaced him with an impeccable clone. But it's still not him, because our lived experiences, who we are in the moment, can only be determined by the moment. Again, all memories are approximations of a lived experience to varying degrees. So that all is not, that changes who we are, right? Like, lived experiences are going to change how you conduct yourself. Me at almost 40 is going to behave very different than me at 20, right? Because I now have 20, I've doubled my lifespan. I've gathered that many more experiences. There's been chemical changes in my body that will impact my mood and the things that I'm motivated by, the things that I avoid. There's been health issues that have occurred, right? So, the end result is you end up with a situation where I can't even really attest if I'm the real thing, right? And I am not trying to have a crisis of identity. I'm just saying that that's the truth as far as I can tell, because there is no real way to know that every morning waking up, you're not somebody new, right? As best as I can tell, in the moment that I'm currently living and existing, as I have every so many days before, 40 almost years. I don't know if it's my mouth is dry or what. Again, and I say this, I swear, every episode, if I'm drinking a lot, it's because I removed the saliva gland that makes a lot of my saliva. I get dry mouth. And because half my mouth doesn't work, whenever I try to drink out of that thing, it's so often just comes out of the side of my mouth. It's frustrating. Little issues though. I mean, that's the cost of living. Um, anywho, so yeah, yeah, it's a very interesting problem. So, and obviously I sort of write this out, but using the Ship of Theseus, one part that I think really fucks people up is, so if you're under the belief that it doesn't matter how many parts of the Ship of Theseus you replace, um, as long as you're not completely destroying it in that moment, right? Like you're disassembling 99.99% and then rebuilding it from there. Um, as long as, there's at least, and what that threshold is, who the fuck knows, right? That's the problem. But as long as there's some pre-existing amount to build on top of, so it's a true replacement rather than a reconstruct, it's still the Ship of Theseus. And then there's problems there. Well, if that's the case, a single board could be argued to be the basis you're building on. Oh, we went through the Ship of Theseus. Everything needs replaced but this one plank. So you rebuild 99.999 repeating of the ship, and you still call it the Ship of Theseus. That's a thing. And then there's the other side, which is where I think adds a whole nother dimension that sort of mind fucks people. Well, what if you then took all the original parts of the Ship of Theseus and then assembled an exact copy of the ship? Which one is the real ship now? Right? This one was the one that is where the parts came from, was originally the Ship of Theseus. This is the one he sailed on, but now all that stuff has been removed and replaced with new stuff, but it was done in a manner in which it slowly rebuilt it. And then we took all those pieces as we removed and replaced a piece, we were putting it in storage. And now that we have, replaced every part at one point or another, we take all those parts and we now build a Ship of Theseus. So in the human context, we replace every cell eventually, right? Over 10 years. Well, what if over those 10 years, every cell that was being replaced, the old one, which was still a viable cell, was then being somehow stored, somewhere. And as you replaced it, it was going into a sort of genetic lattice, right? Sort of like how they do, like when everyone do like clone a heart, they'll take like a washed out like cell lattice. They just like the proteins, like a ghost heart kind of thing. And then they fill that in with stem cells and they sort of build a heart, right? What if you did that, right? You had a lattice, that is, the lattice, the template for me, and every cell I'm replacing, that original cell then goes to that lattice. And then in the end, you have my clone, but it's my clone using my original cells. And then essentially you create a near pristine copy of my mind and put it in there. Well, now who's the real original? These are very real problems that I don't think these are ones that really, it's mind soup. It's a near impossibility to clearly define this. And some of it could be intellectual masturbation, right? Feels good, doesn't serve a purpose, because it's all very hypothetical. But it also kind of isn't, because we're talking about doing things. And down here, I sort of talk about the digital immortality. So this is one that people want to go after, right? We've seen this done a few times. So the most recent anime that is a really great anime, Pantheon, explores this, where they're uploading the intelligence of people. And in this particular case, it is asserted strongly that the process kills the person, right? Because it atomizes their brain, right? Always an atomization. So you're really just deconstructing organic matter down to its base components that allows you to get a true idea on how to create the copy from the base layer up, right? Recreate the application from the lowest binary up, right? Rather than, taking some higher level compiled language that's, like Python or C sharp, something that, humans can look at and read and have an understanding what it does. But it itself needs to translate several layers down to get to the point where the actual raw data stream exists in binary to do the same thing. Because there we have no translation, right? You have the binary. You're taking out those layers of code translation, right? So, like C sharp has to translate to, and depending on where you're working with, right? Source is different from compiled. Um, Same effect, same application, but the manner in which you're interfacing with it during the development changes tremendously. And there's different code that's used to run those code, right? The compiled code runs off runtime code, right? The source code runs off of SDK and, DLL codes. And then they themselves, all of this then translates to, like the just-in-time or JIT languages that are then used to continue converting it down to lower level languages. That's one of the fascinating things about C++. It's a language that's pretty far down the stack. And then, in the case of computer languages, you reverse it. Higher up means it's easier, lower down means it's harder, because you're getting closer to the machine level. Now, is there somebody out there who could actually program using just straight up binary? Probably. It'd have to be something simplistic, 'cause that's extremely complicated. That might be, and I don't know, I'm going to school to learn to be a software engineer. I taught myself, so I don't know the history, but it might be the original punch cards, the original way that they did build programs for computers. That was essentially binary, right? They have a row of values, and they're saying which value is a one and which value is a zero to come out with their application. That's possible. I don't know. But in theory, there's no reason, yes, programming in C sharp is significantly easier than programming in JIT. And JIT is significantly easier than coding in binary or any of the layers in between. I don't even know what all the layers are. Where was I going with that? I don't know. Where's I going with that? So we're talking about Pantheon. Anyways, the bottom line is because of the data stream, you have to break it down to its bare, break it down to its versions of binary, right? Structure and tissue and, what it means to exist in reality. Break that down to its, lowest level, individualized parts that actually translates over to that person. Yeah, you're probably going at the atomic level, with DNA being sort of your blueprint of how to reconstruct that, right? But that doesn't tell all the story, right? Sure, you could probably look at DNA, a DNA strand. I don't even know how all that works. From like the nucleus of a cell, and maybe see things such as age, but you're not gonna have memories in there, right? That sort of stuff is essentially data, right? And at current, I don't remember the exact, almost like a paradox. It's a concept that essentially states that there is no way to truly clone or copy information, right? There's always a loss, right? No matter how high quality is, there's a loss, right? So, graphic designers know when they're working with pictures to save it as a TIFF, GIFF. That is going to be the highest remained quality on the save. So as you edit it, you're less likely to degrade and slowly start to cheapen the quality of it, which is why anytime you go to save anything, right? So I think I have a critic. So we pop open all critic here. And when I want to say something critical, so we'll pull up my let's picture me without a shirt on now. So if we pull up this, which is a Adeptus Custodia, I'm slowly working on, I need to get back to, and I then say I want to save this, right? So obviously I get all these different options here as far as file types. There's the TIFF I'm talking about. But yeah, tips is generally what they say that you should save something as. But let's say I want to save it as a JPEG. I think when I hit save, yeah, I'll get some additional options that will pop up to try to help me preserve some of the quality, right? And, it doesn't matter what we do here. At the end of the day, we're not going to be truly preserving the file in a state in which makes it an exact copy. That's the first problem you have to figure out to even start talking about truly cloning someone's mind, whether it be for uploading it to the cloud so they can live an eternity in the cloud or transmitting it or anything, right? Making a true clone of someone else. All of that is reliant on the ability to build out a near perfect copy at the data level. Or to even just turn it into data, right? I think that, I do believe there's a branch of neuroscience right now that is doing that, where they're mapping and translating very simple creatures like worms, jellyfish, their minds to, what that looks like in a data stream. And, then they're like putting essentially the brain, they're programming a brain into like a fucking Roomba or something, right? Of a worm, and watching its behavior and blah blah blah. And it's all based off of an actual worm that did live. Does that mean that Roomba, whatever robot that they just put that brain into, is that worm? No, that worm's dead. They killed it. The worm just didn't live long, right? What is there is an approximation and a damn near good one, right? Like that's it. It will never be the worm, and to expect anything different from an exponentially more complex mind like ours is crazy talk, right? And you see that in Pantheon. You see that when the girl goes and she sees her father who was uploaded, and it's a new copy of him. He is missing a massive chunk of current events. To him, he's real. He's the guy. He's it. He's the thing. Everything that's happening to him is happening to him as he is. He doesn't realize he's just a copy. All of them are copies, right? Even the original avatar she interfaced with at the start of the series isn't really him, right? The real him died. He died. His brain was atomized because he was dying from cancer anyway. I think it was cancer. So that's the truth of it. They even look at that with Westworld, right? When they're trying to, they're like recording the brain. Like I think they had like the original founder of the company behind the theme park. The whole thing there is much about memories, right? They keep wiping memories, and yet some of it still persists. So they can't get an actually true clean wipe, and it causes all these sort of weird things to go on. And again, we have a lot of science fiction that explores this common sort of theme at its core. And they're hinting at exactly what I'm saying, right? Like they're not saying it necessarily out loud. Maybe sometimes they are. But even in Westworld, when they've cloned the old CEO, and I think he died from cancer too, or something killed him. From a from like a health issue. Like he had some sort of health issue and he died. And so, they're trying to establish a perfect mapping of his brain. And in it, every attempt that they make, no matter how close it is, the new CEO, the guy who ended up being, what do they call him? The Man in Black, the old dude who was the young dude. And yeah, that's how it works. Old dudes are young dudes. If you watch the series, you know what I'm talking about. Well, he keeps destroying every new trial, every new clone that they make, because he doesn't think that, the person's brain is where it needs to be. Again, he's the one determining that as the observer, right? He's saying, nope, this guy's not good enough to destroy him, right? And then they fucking incinerate him. But to the person inside the fucking cage being tested, he is the guy, right? Even if there's something he's missing, right? A memory he's missing, doesn't matter, right? There are memories that any of us have on any given day that we may forget, right? We forget words. forget words that we knew a minute ago, right? Like the brain is very all over the fucking place and dynamic and volatile and non-volatile. It's just a very complex thing, and you're trying to simplify it and put it in the confines of something that I simply don't think architecturally is capable of faithfully reproducing what you're trying to reproduce. And I don't think you're ever going to. And so if you can't get that part right, then all the other this shit just isn't going to happen, right? It isn't going to happen. And, that's why I sort of, mentioned here, as a species, we rush towards these technology without a pause. We are eager to digitize or beam ourselves across the stars. So we're so focused on what we believe to be the incentive, on the reward, whether it be digital immortality or the ability to travel at the speed of the data stream. We don't really sit back to think of what is its true cost. Have we really explored what this really does mean to the subjective us? Because I believe the subjective you is you. And this is what's happening. You're being replaced by a copy that doesn't know it's a copy. That's my belief as this. I've never seen anything that makes me feel differently about it. I have had some pushback from a friend of mine who was going down this notion of the soul, and I think that's a problem to base anything off of, because a soul has never been verified to be anything. There's some recent studies that came out that show the brain shows a burst of gamma wave level activity around, during like cardiac related death. And if you are to survive that, they bring you back. Memories of it will also spur the same sort of reaction. Those that are a little bit more grounded and not being crazy believe that's just a stress reaction, right? And that's all it is a stress reaction. And I agree with that, because if they're trying to say that's the soul, they're trying to say that the brain is the housing of the soul. What does that say about people that are atomized so fast that gamma wave process, which is observable and measurable in both time and presentation, doesn't have a chance to go off, right? There was a guy that was fucking sucked through during depressurization of a sub that went wrong. He was sucked through a hole that was about the size of a quarter. His entire body was sucked through it in less than a quarter of a second, right? Instantly turned into a gigantic human noodle within fractions of a second. Probably dead damn near close to immediately. By the time he had even felt the pull on his body, he was dead. There was nothing left to even begin to experience a death experience, right? All of it's gone. Everything that was him has been turned into a noodle. And there's people that have been turned into a mist, right? People that have been atomized, right? The atomic bomb. People that were incinerated by the air being on fire as plasma that were just completely evaporated. And there's probably even faster ways people have died outside of that, right? At the end of the day, I don't think that makes a lot of sense, because that then creates a physical dependency on physical continuity of tissue in order to actually transfer any kind of soul. And this whole notion about, slight gram reduction in the body at the time of death, that could be attributed to any number of things, right? I don't think either of those passes the bar to be empirical evidence of the soul. That's just, again, that's a human construct and with zero physical evidence to back it up. So I don't want to mix that into this conversation, because I just don't think it's real. I don't think it's relevant. I don't think it plays into that. I don't think it changes the calculus in any meaningful way. But anyways, I really am trying to keep these around an hour now, especially because I got things to do. So that's going to be it for this one. I'll make some edits, clean it up, put it up there. Hopefully, this one actually gets some people to watch it. My last one's still sitting at 0 views, but it's a little depressing because I do put a decent amount of work into these. But it's a hobby, so I'm not gonna get super upset over it. It's not like I'm trying to turn this into, my day job. I have a day job that I still enjoy very much, even if AI is looking to replace me. Till that happens, I'm fine as is. Anyways, I'll catch you on the next one. And I'll decide by then what the next topic is going to be. See